a quiet little neighborhood on the edge of town, life moved at its own gentle pace. The houses were neat and tidy, their lawns perfectly trimmed, and the streets clean enough for children to ride their bikes without worry. It was the kind of place where people knew each other by name, where neighbors shared cups of sugar or waved hello as they passed by. Everything seemed picture perfect, until Linda Harper arrived. Linda moved into the house at the end of Oak Street one sunny afternoon. Her car, packed to the brim with boxes and bags, pulled up just after lunchtime. She stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses and a frown that didn't seem to lift even when she looked around at her new surroundings. Linda wasn't particularly friendly when the neighbors introduced themselves. She nodded curtly at Mrs. Ramirez, who lived next door, and barely acknowledged Mr. Patel across the street when he offered to help carry some of her things inside. At first, no one thought much of it. Newcomers often needed time to adjust, especially if they weren't used to suburban living. But it didn't take long for the residents of Oak Street to realize that Linda wasn't like most newcomers. Within days, she began making her opinions known in ways that left everyone uneasy. It started small. Linda complained about the noise coming from the Ramirez's backyard late one evening. They were having a family barbecue, laughing and talking while grilling burgers under strings of twinkling lights. It wasn't loud, not compared to the 4th of July celebrations the neighborhood held every year. But Linda stormed over anyway, pounding on their fence until Mrs. Ramirez came outside. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" Linda snapped, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Some of us are trying to relax in peace." Mrs. Ramirez blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry," she said politely. "We'll keep it down." But Linda didn't leave it there. Over the next few weeks, she lodged multiple complaints with the Homeowners Association about the Ramirezes being too loud whenever they had guests over. She sent them letters detailing how their music disturbed her evenings and accused their kids of playing soccer too close to her driveway. Each time, the Ramirezes tried to be understanding. They turned down the volume, shortened their gatherings, and reminded their children to stay away from Linda's property. Yet nothing seemed to satisfy her. Things only got worse when Linda turned her attention to the Patels. Their home was always lively, filled with warmth and hospitality. Once a month, they hosted small cultural festivals in their front yard, decorating it with colorful fabrics and lighting oil lamps to celebrate traditions from India. Neighbors loved these events. They brought dishes to share, danced to unfamiliar rhythms, and marveled at the intricate henna designs Mrs. Patel painted on their hands. But not Linda. One Saturday morning, as the Patels prepared for their latest festival, Linda marched over with a clipboard in hand. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, glaring at the decorations going up. "We're celebrating Diwali," Mr. Patel explained patiently. "It's a festival of lights. You're welcome to join us if you'd like." Linda wrinkled her nose. "This isn't India," she said sharply, "and I don't appreciate all this nonsense cluttering up the neighborhood." Her words stung, but the Patels chose to ignore her. They continued setting up, hoping she would lose interest and go away. Instead, Linda spent the rest of the day muttering under her breath and peering through her curtains at the festivities. When the event ended, she wrote yet another letter to the Homeowners Association, calling the gathering disruptive and demanding stricter rules against such activities in the future. As the weeks went by, Linda's behavior became increasingly toxic. She targeted nearly everyone on the block, finding fault wherever she could. She criticized Emily Carter for hanging wind chimes on her porch, claiming they made an irritating clinking sound. She accused Jake Carter of parking his truck too close to her mailbox, even though there was plenty of space between the two. She even called animal control on Daniel Brooks because his dog barked occasionally during thunderstorms. No one felt safe from her judgment. Even George Miller, a retired engineer who had lived on Oak Street for decades, found himself on the receiving end of Linda's wrath. He had recently started fixing up his garden, planting flowers and trimming bushes, to give his yard a fresh look. One afternoon as he worked, Linda stomped over and scolded him for letting leaves blow onto her sidewalk. "You need to clean this mess up immediately," she ordered, pointing at the scattered foliage, "or I'll report you for littering." George, stared at her for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or sigh. "These are leaves, ma'am," he said finally. "They fall off trees. It happens." "Well, it shouldn't happen here," Linda shot back before storming off. Her constant complaints and accusations created tension throughout the neighborhood. People stopped hosting parties or inviting friends over, fearing they might attract Linda's ire. Parents hesitated to let their children play outside, worried she would accuse them of trespassing. Conversations among neighbors grew quieter, tinged with frustration and fear. What had once been a warm, welcoming community now felt cold and divided, all because of one woman. Despite her abrasive personality, Linda managed to avoid consequences for her actions. She knew how to phrase her complaints just right, framing herself as a victim of unruly neighbors rather than the instigator she truly was. The Homeowners Association struggled to address her grievances fairly, caught between maintaining peace and protecting the rights of other residents. And so, Linda continued unchecked, growing bolder with each passing day. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across Oak Street, Linda sat alone in her living room, sipping tea and reviewing the latest batch of letters she planned to send. Outside, laughter drifted faintly through the air, the sound of families enjoying dinner together, of children chasing fireflies in the twilight. But Linda paid no mind to those moments of joy. In her world, happiness belonged to others, and she saw no reason why they should have it if she couldn't. Unbeknownst to her, however, change was brewing. The neighbors, tired of living in fear, were beginning to talk amongst themselves. They whispered about standing up to Linda, about reclaiming their sense of safety and belonging. For now, though, Linda remained oblivious, secure in her belief that she held all the power. Little did she know, karma had plans of its own, and it wouldn't be long before they came knocking at her door. As days turned into weeks, the tension on Oak Street grew thicker. Linda Harper's constant complaints and harsh words had left a deep mark on the neighborhood. What was once a place of warmth and friendship now felt cold and distant. Neighbors, who used to chat over fences or share meals during holidays, now avoided each other's eyes. The sense of community that had defined Oak Street for years was slowly slipping away, replaced by fear and frustration. Emily Carter noticed the change more than anyone else. She and her husband Jake had always been active members of the neighborhood. They organized potluck dinners, helped new families settle in, and even started a weekend gardening club. But since Linda moved in, their efforts seemed pointless. No one wanted to gather anymore. Not when they knew Linda might show up uninvited or file another complaint about noise or parking. Emily missed the laughter, the shared stories, and the feeling of belonging. It hurt to see her neighbors so unhappy, but she didn't know how to fix it. One afternoon, as Emily watered the plants on her porch, she saw Mr. Patel walking down the street with his son, Rohan. They were carrying bags from the grocery store, chatting quietly. Emily waved, but Mr. Patel only gave a weak smile before hurrying inside. That small moment stayed with her all day. She couldn't shake the sadness in his expression. Later that evening, she decided to visit him. When Emily knocked on the Patels' door, Mrs. Patel answered, looking surprised but welcoming. "Emily, what brings you here?" she asked kindly. "I just wanted to check in," Emily said, stepping inside. "You and Mr. Patel have been so quiet lately. Is everything okay?" Mrs. Patel sighed, motioning for Emily to sit at the kitchen table. "It's hard to explain," she began. "Linda, she makes us feel unwelcome. Every time we try to celebrate our traditions or invite people over, she finds a way to ruin it. We thought moving here would be different, but now I wonder if we made a mistake." Emily frowned. "You shouldn't feel like that. This is your home too." "I know," Mrs. Patel replied softly. "But sometimes it feels easier to stay quiet than fight back." The conversation weighed heavily on Emily as she walked home. She thought about the Ramirezes, who hadn't hosted a barbecue in months, and Daniel Brooks, whose dog now barked less often because he rarely took it outside. Even George Miller, usually cheerful and easygoing, seemed quieter these days. Linda's behavior wasn't just annoying, it was tearing the neighborhood apart. Determined to do something, Emily called a meeting with a few trusted neighbors. She invited the Ramirezes, the Patels, Daniel and George to her house the following evening. When everyone arrived, Emily served coffee and snacks, trying to create a relaxed atmosphere despite the seriousness of the topic. "Thanks for coming," Emily said, sitting down with the group. "I think we all agree that things aren't right around here. Linda's making life miserable for everyone, and it's affecting us all. We need to figure out what to do." Mrs. Ramirez nodded. "She's impossible to deal with. Every time we turn around, she's complaining about something else. I don't know how much longer we can keep giving in." George leaned forward, resting, his elbows on his knees. "We can't let her win," he said firmly. "If we keep letting her push us around, she'll never stop. But we also can't stoop to her level. There has to be a better way." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "She doesn't listen to reason. Every time someone tries to talk to her, it just makes things worse." "That's true," Emily admitted. "But maybe we're approaching it wrong. Instead of confronting her directly, what if we focus on supporting each other? If we stand united, she won't be able to divide us." The idea sparked interest among the group. They discussed ways to rebuild their sense of community without giving Linda the satisfaction of seeing them upset. Slowly, a plan began to take shape. Over the next few days, the neighbors worked together to organize a block party. It wasn't meant to provoke Linda. It was meant to remind everyone, including themselves, of what Oak Street used to be. Flyers went up on mailboxes, but not Linda's, inviting residents to join in games, food, and music. The goal was simple: bring people together and show that kindness could still exist, even in the face of negativity. On the day of the event, colorful balloons decorated front yards, and tables lined the street with homemade dishes. Children laughed as they played tag while adults mingled, sharing stories and catching up. For the first time in months, Oak Street felt alive again, but Linda noticed. From her window, she watched the festivities unfold with growing irritation. How dare they celebrate without her? Didn't they realize how much noise they were making? Fuming, she picked up her phone and dialed the non-emergency line for the police department. "This is ridiculous," she told the officer on the other end. "There's a loud party happening right outside my house. Someone needs to shut it down." The officer promised to send a patrol car to investigate. When the officers arrived, however, they found nothing amiss. Music played softly in the background, and conversations flowed naturally. Neighbors greeted the officers warmly, explaining that this was simply a friendly gathering to reconnect after a difficult period. "Everything seems fine here," one officer said, smiling. "Enjoy your evening." Linda couldn't believe it. Her complaint had been dismissed, and worse, the neighbors looked happier than ever. As the block party continued late into the night, Linda paced inside her house, her anger boiling over. She hated being ignored, hated feeling powerless. Something had to give. Later that night, unable to sleep, Linda hatched a plan. While everyone else was tucked safely in bed, she slipped outside, dressed in dark clothes and carrying a small pocket knife. Her target? Daniel Brooks' car. She crept silently through the shadows until she reached his driveway. With quick, deliberate motions, she slashed the tires, leaving deep gashes that would be impossible to miss in the morning. Satisfied with her work, Linda hurried back inside, locking her door behind her. She felt a twisted sense of triumph, convinced she had finally struck a blow against the neighbors who dared to defy her. What she didn't realize, however, was that karma has a way of catching up, even in the darkest corners of the night. When Daniel woke up the next morning and saw the damage to his car, his heart sank. He immediately suspected Linda, given her history of hostility, but he needed proof. After reporting the incident to the police, he mentioned it to his neighbors. News spread quickly, and soon everyone was talking about what had happened. Unbeknownst to Linda, several homes on Oak Street had security cameras installed, including Emily Carter's. When the footage was reviewed, it revealed exactly what everyone feared. Linda sneaking through the darkness, vandalizing Daniel's property. Armed with undeniable evidence, the police returned to Linda's house later that day. When officers knocked on her door, Linda acted innocent, denying any involvement. "Someone must have planted fake evidence," she insisted. But the video told a different story. Handcuffs clicked into place as she was arrested for criminal mischief, her protests echoing down the street. For the first time in months, the neighbors breathed a collective sigh of relief. Linda's arrest marked a turning point for Oak Street. Though she would eventually return, her power over the neighborhood had been broken, and in its place, a renewed sense of hope began to grow, a reminder that unity and resilience could overcome even the darkest forces. After Linda Harper's arrest, Oak Street felt different. The air seemed lighter, as if a storm cloud that had been hovering over the neighborhood had finally moved on. For weeks, the residents had lived in fear of her complaints and accusations. But now, with Linda gone, at least temporarily, they began to relax. It wasn't just the absence of her sharp words or constant meddling. It was the realization that they had stood together and survived something difficult. That sense of unity gave them strength. Daniel Brooks became a kind of hero among the neighbors after his vandalized car led to Linda's downfall. People stopped by his house to check on him, bringing casseroles and baked goods as gestures of support. Daniel appreciated the kindness but didn't want anyone making too big a deal out of what happened. "It's not about me," he told them. "This is about all of us sticking together. We showed her she can't control us anymore." Still, life on Oak Street wasn't completely back to normal. Without Linda around, there was an awkward silence in the neighborhood. People weren't sure how to act or whether they should celebrate her arrest. Some felt guilty for being relieved, while others were still angry about everything she had put them through. Even though Linda was gone, her impact lingered like a shadow. One person who struggled the most with these mixed feelings was Mrs. Ramirez. She lived right next door to Linda, which meant she had dealt with her neighbor's behavior more than anyone else. Every time Mrs. Ramirez stepped outside, she glanced nervously at Linda's empty house, half expecting the woman to reappear and start causing trouble again. Her husband, Carlos, noticed her unease and tried to reassure her. "She's not coming back anytime soon," Carlos said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "She messed up, and now she has to face the consequences. Let's focus on enjoying our lives instead of worrying about her." Mrs. Ramirez nodded, but didn't say anything. Deep down, she knew Carlos was right, but it was hard to let go of the fear that had taken root in her mind. Linda's insults and accusations had cut deep, making her doubt herself and her family. Would things ever truly feel okay again? Meanwhile, George Miller decided it was time to take action. He had always been the calm, steady presence on Oak Street, the type of person everyone trusted. Now, seeing how shaken his neighbors still were, he wanted to help them heal. One afternoon, he gathered a few people in his backyard for a casual meeting. Among those present were Emily Carter, Mr. Patel, and Daniel Brooks. "I think we need to do something meaningful," George said, leaning forward in his chair. "Something that reminds us why this neighborhood is special and helps us move past what happened." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "What did you have in mind?" George smiled. "How about we create a community garden, a shared space where everyone can come together to plant flowers, vegetables, whatever they want. It'll give us a reason to work side by side and rebuild the connection we lost." The idea sparked excitement among the group. Mr. Patel loved the thought of growing spices and herbs from his homeland, while Emily imagined bright sunflowers lining the edges of the garden. Daniel suggested adding a small seating area where neighbors could sit and chat. By the end of the meeting, everyone agreed it was worth pursuing. Over the next few weeks, the project took shape. Neighbors donated tools, seeds, and materials to build raised beds. Kids helped dig holes and spread mulch, giggling as they got dirt on their hands. Even Mrs. Ramirez joined in, finding comfort in the simple act of planting something new. As the garden grew, so did the sense of camaraderie among the residents. Conversations flowed freely, laughter filled the air, and for the first time in months, Oak Street felt alive again. But even as the community healed, questions remained about Linda. Would she return? And if she did, how would they handle her? These uncertainties weighed on everyone's minds, especially when news arrived that Linda had completed her court-ordered anger management classes and paid her fines. She would be coming home soon. When the day finally came, Linda drove up to her house in a rented moving truck. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted nervously as she unloaded boxes. She avoided looking at her neighbors, keeping her head down, as if ashamed or perhaps defiant. No one approached her, unsure of what to say or whether she deserved a second chance. For the first few days, Linda kept to herself. She stayed indoors, drawing the curtains shut and rarely venturing outside. Some neighbors wondered if she had changed during her time away, while others assumed she was simply lying low until she figured out her next move. Either way, no one wanted to risk another confrontation. Then, one crisp morning, Linda surprised everyone by stepping onto her porch. She carried a tray of cookies and walked hesitantly toward Mrs. Ramirez's house. When Mrs. Ramirez opened the door, she froze, unsure what to expect. I brought these for you," Linda said quietly, holding out the tray. "I know I've caused a lot of problems and I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'd like to try to make things better." Mrs. Ramirez stared at her for a moment, then accepted the cookies with a nod. "Thank you," she said simply, before closing the door. Word of Linda's gesture spread quickly through the neighborhood. Reactions were mixed. Some neighbors admired her attempt to apologize, while others dismissed it as insincere. But one thing was clear. Linda's return forced everyone to confront their feelings about her, and about themselves. George decided to invite Linda to join the community garden project. He approached her house one afternoon, knocking gently on the door. When she answered, she looked startled but invited him inside. "I wanted to talk to you about something," George began. "We've started a garden down the street, a place where everyone can come together and grow things. I think it could be good for you to get involved. What do you say?" Linda hesitated, her fingers twisting nervously. "You really want me there?" she asked. "After everything I've done?" George nodded. "We're not perfect, any of us, but we're trying to move forward. If you're serious about changing, this could be a good place to start." Linda didn't respond right away. She stared at the floor, lost in thought. Finally, she looked up and gave a small, tentative smile. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll give it a try." The next day, Linda showed up at the garden wearing old jeans and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun. At first, the other neighbors watched her warily, unsure how to act. But as the hours passed, Linda worked quietly alongside them, planting seeds and watering plants without complaint. Slowly, the tension eased, replaced by cautious curiosity. Mr. Patel struck up a conversation with her, explaining how certain herbs thrived in specific conditions. To everyone's surprise, Linda listened intently, asking questions and even offering suggestions based on her own gardening experience. By the end of the day, she had earned a few smiles and nods of approval, not forgiveness exactly, but a step in the right direction. As weeks turned into months, Linda continued participating in the garden and other neighborhood activities. She attended potluck dinners, helped organize a cleanup day at the local park, and even offered to babysit when Mrs. Ramirez needed a break. Though some neighbors remained guarded, others began to see glimpses of the person Linda might become, if given the chance. Of course, healing took time. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, and there were moments when old tensions flared. But each small act of kindness from both sides helped mend the cracks in the foundation of Oak Street. In the end, it wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about choosing to move forward together, proving that even the darkest chapters could lead to brighter days. As the weeks went by, Linda Harper's presence in the neighborhood began to shift. At first, her attempts to make amends felt forced and awkward, like she was following a script rather than speaking from the heart. But over time, something changed. Not just in how the neighbors saw her, but in Linda herself. Working in the community garden gave her a chance to slow down and reflect. For years, she had been so focused on what she didn't like about others that she hadn't stopped to think about why she felt that way, or how it affected those around her. One sunny afternoon, as Linda knelt in the dirt planting marigolds, Emily Carter approached her with a basket of fresh vegetables harvested from the garden. "Here," Emily said, handing her a few tomatoes and cucumbers. You've earned these. Linda looked up, surprised. Oh, thank you, she stammered, taking the basket. I don't know if I deserve them, though. Emily shrugged with a small smile. We all mess up sometimes. What matters is what we do after. The comment stayed with Linda long after Emily walked away. She thought about her past behavior, the complaints, the insults, the vandalism, and realized how selfish she had been. Her actions weren't just about annoyance, they were rooted in fear. Fear of change, fear of people who were different from her, fear of losing control. For the first time, she understood that her anger hadn't protected her. It had isolated her. That evening, sitting alone at her kitchen table, Linda made a decision. If she wanted to truly change, she needed to go beyond surface-level apologies. She needed to show her neighbors that she was willing to learn, to grow, and to become part of the community she had once tried to tear apart. The next day, Linda attended a neighborhood meeting held at George Miller's house. It was the first time she had joined one of these gatherings since moving to Oak Street, and she felt nervous as she stepped inside. The room fell silent when she entered, but George quickly broke the tension by inviting her to sit down. Thanks for coming, he said warmly. We're talking about plans for the upcoming fall festival. Any ideas? Linda hesitated before speaking. Well, maybe we could have a booth where kids can paint rocks or make crafts, something simple but fun. To her relief, no one laughed or dismissed her suggestion. In fact, Mrs. Patel nodded enthusiastically. That's a great idea. We could even use some of the herbs from the garden to make sachets or scented candles. Encouraged by their response, Linda spoke up again. And maybe I could help organize it. I'd like to contribute more. Her offer surprised everyone, including herself. But as the meeting continued, Linda found herself participating in ways she never had before, offering opinions, volunteering for tasks, and even laughing at one of Daniel Brooks' jokes. By the end of the night, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her place here after all. Over the next few weeks, Linda threw herself into preparations for the fall festival. She worked alongside her neighbors, setting up tables, decorating the street, and helping bake cookies for the dessert table. At first, some residents still treated her with caution, unsure whether her efforts were genuine. But as they spent more time together, they began to see glimpses of the person Linda was trying to become. One afternoon, while hanging strings of lights in the Ramirez's backyard, Linda struck up a conversation with Carlos Ramirez. They talked about gardening, sharing tips on how to keep plants healthy during colder months. For the first time, Linda didn't feel the need to criticize or complain. Instead, she listened and learned, enjoying the exchange of ideas. You're good at this, Carlos said, nodding toward the lights she had strung perfectly along the fence. Maybe you should come over sometime and help me fix my sprinklers. They haven't worked right since last summer. Linda smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. I'd like that. On the day of the festival, Oak Street buzzed with excitement. Families wandered from booth to booth. Children raced each other in sack races, and laughter filled the air. Linda stood behind the craft station, helping kids paint rocks and tie ribbons onto sticks. She watched as Mrs. Patel taught a group of teenagers how to roll beeswax candles, and as George handed out slices of pumpkin pie to anyone who passed by. For the first time in years, Linda felt a sense of belonging. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when old tensions flared, like when a neighbor accidentally bumped into her and muttered an apology under their breath. But overall, the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. Even Emily Carter stopped by to chat, complimenting Linda on how well the craft station turned out. You've done a lot of work for the neighborhood lately, Emily said sincerely. It hasn't gone unnoticed. Linda ducked her head, embarrassed but grateful. Thank you, I'm just trying to make things better. You are, Emily replied before walking off to join her husband at the food table. Despite the progress, not everyone was ready to fully trust Linda yet. Daniel Brooks in particular remained skeptical. While he appreciated her efforts, he couldn't forget the night she slashed his tires. Every time he saw her, memories of that incident resurfaced, making it hard to let go of his anger. One evening, as the festival wound down and neighbors began cleaning up, Daniel approached Linda. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. His tone neutral but firm. Linda nodded, bracing herself for whatever he might say. "Of course." They stepped away from the crowd, standing near a row of pumpkins stacked by the curb. Daniel crossed his arms and took a deep breath. "Look, I want to believe you've changed, and I'll admit, you've done a lot to help around here lately, but I can't pretend like nothing happened between us. You hurt me, and it's going to take time for me to get past that." Linda swallowed hard, guilt washing over her. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'm sorry for what I did to your car. There's no excuse for it. All I can do is keep trying to prove that I'm not the same person I used to be." Daniel studied her for a moment, searching her face for any sign of dishonesty. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, I'll give you credit for owning up to it, just don't stop trying, all right?" "I won't," Linda promised. "Thank you for being honest with me." As October turned to November, the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared entirely, but they were healing. Linda continued attending meetings, volunteering for projects, and building relationships with her neighbors. Slowly but surely she earned their trust, not because she demanded it, but because she proved through her actions that she was committed to change. One chilly Saturday morning, the Patels hosted a small gathering at their house to celebrate Diwali. This time, instead of complaining or staying away, Linda accepted their invitation. She arrived carrying a plate of homemade cookies and a nervous smile. "Happy Diwali," she said, handing the plate to Mrs. Patel. "I hope these are..." "Okay." I followed a recipe online. Mrs. Patel beamed. "They look wonderful. Thank you for bringing them, and for coming tonight." Inside, the house glowed with the soft light of oil lamps, and the scent of spices filled the air. Linda sat quietly, at first observing the rituals and listening to stories about the significance of the holiday. When Mr. Patel invited everyone to try henna designs, Linda hesitated but eventually held out her hand. As intricate patterns were drawn on her palm, she felt a sense of connection she hadn't experienced in years. Afterward, as she left the Patel home, Linda paused to look back at the warm, welcoming scene. For so long, she had viewed differences as threats, as reasons to push people away. Now she saw them as opportunities to learn, to grow, and to find beauty in the world around her. Though challenges lay ahead, Linda knew she was on the right path. She had faced her mistakes, taken responsibility for her actions, and begun to rebuild her life. More importantly, she had discovered that true strength came not from control or judgment, but from humility, kindness, and the courage to change. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt hopeful about the future. Winter arrived on Oak Street, bringing with it frosty mornings and the smell of wood smoke in the air. The trees stood bare, their branches reaching toward the gray sky, but the neighborhood felt warmer than it had in years. Linda Harper continued her efforts to rebuild trust, showing up early for community projects and staying late to help clean up. Her neighbors noticed the change, not just in what she did, but in how she carried herself. There was a softness to her now, a willingness to listen and learn that hadn't been there before. One crisp December morning, George Miller called a meeting at his house to discuss plans for the holiday season. Everyone gathered in his cozy living room, sipping hot cocoa and nibbling on cookies Mrs. Ramirez had baked. The atmosphere was cheerful, filled with laughter and excited chatter about decorations, caroling, and gift exchanges. Linda sat quietly, in the corner, letting others take the lead, but when George asked for ideas, she raised her hand hesitantly. "What if we organize a toy drive?" she suggested. "We could collect gifts for families who might not have much this year." The room fell silent for a moment as everyone turned to look at her. Then Emily Carter broke into a smile. "That's a wonderful idea," she said. "We could set up a drop-off spot at the community center and spread the word through social media." Others chimed in with suggestions, how to advertise the drive, which organizations to partner with, and ways to involve local businesses. By the end of the meeting, the plan was set, and Linda volunteered to coordinate the effort. For the first time, she felt like she was truly contributing something meaningful, not just going through the motions to make up for her past mistakes. Over the next few weeks, Linda threw herself into organizing the toy drive. She spent hours calling stores, setting up donation bins, and creating flyers to hang around town. At first, some neighbors worried she might burn out or lose interest, but Linda surprised them by sticking with it every step of the way. She even recruited Daniel Brooks to help load boxes of toys into his truck for delivery. "You've really taken charge of this," Daniel said one afternoon as they stacked stuffed animals and board games into crates. "I'm impressed." Linda smiled faintly. "It feels good to do something positive for once," she admitted. "And honestly, I needed this. Not just for you all, but for me too." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Well, whatever your reasons, it's making a difference. Thanks for stepping up." As the toy drive gained momentum, Linda started receiving messages of gratitude from people outside the neighborhood, parents thanking her for the donated gifts, teachers praising her initiative, and even strangers offering to volunteer. Each note reminded her why she had decided to change in the first place, to be someone who gave back instead of taking away. The day before Christmas Eve, the community came together to sort and wrap the collected toys. Linda's living room became the hub of activity, with neighbors streaming in and out to lend a hand. Mrs. Patel demonstrated traditional Indian wrapping techniques using colorful fabric scraps, while Emily Carter played festive music in the background. Children giggled as they helped tie ribbons and stick bows onto packages, their excitement infectious. For Linda, the scene was overwhelming, in the best possible way. She watched as her neighbors worked side by side, sharing jokes and stories, their faces glowing with joy. It struck her how far they had all come since her arrival on Oak Street. What had once been a fractured, fearful community now felt like a family. When the last gift was wrapped and packed into cars for delivery, Linda stepped outside to take a breath of cold night air. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, settling gently on the ground. As she stood there gazing at the quiet street, she heard footsteps behind her. "Hey," said a voice. Turning, she saw Jake Carter walking toward her, holding 2 steaming mugs of cocoa. "Thought you could use a break." Linda accepted the mug gratefully. "Thanks, this means a lot." Jake leaned against the railing beside her. "You've done a lot for us lately. We don't say it enough, but we appreciate it." His words caught her off guard. "I'm just trying to fix things," she said softly. "Trying to be better." "And you are," Jake replied. "Nobody expects perfection, Linda. Just keep doing what you're doing." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the snow fall. For the first time in years, Linda didn't feel the need to fill the quiet with noise or complaints. Instead, she let herself simply exist in the moment, surrounded by beauty and kindness. On Christmas Eve, the neighborhood held its annual candlelight walk. Families gathered at the park, carrying lanterns and singing carols as they strolled down Oak Street. Linda joined them, holding a small candle and walking beside George Miller. They passed houses decorated with twinkling lights and wreaths, each home shining brighter than the last. "This is nice," Linda said, glancing around at the smiling faces. "It feels peaceful." "It is," George agreed. "And you helped make it happen." Linda shook her head modestly. "Not really. I just followed your lead." George chuckled. "Don't sell yourself short. You've been part of this community longer than you think." As they reached the end of the street, the group paused to sing Silent Night. Linda closed her eyes, listening to the harmonious voices rise into the frosty air. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe it was relief that she had finally found acceptance after so many months of doubt and struggle. Or maybe it was hope that the future would hold more moments like this, moments of connection and belonging. The holidays passed in a blur of warmth and cheer, leaving Oak Street blanketed in snow and goodwill. But life doesn't stop for anyone, and soon the realities of daily living returned. School resumed, work schedules picked up, and winter storms rolled in, forcing residents indoors. Yet even amid the busyness, the bonds forged during the previous months remained strong. One snowy afternoon, Linda received an unexpected visit from Mrs. Ramirez. Standing on her porch, bundled in a thick coat and scarf, Mrs. Ramirez held a thermos and a plate of tamales. "I brought you lunch," she said with a shy smile. "Thought you might like some company." Linda hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. "That's very kind of you," she said, leading Mrs. Ramirez to the kitchen. "Thank you." They sat at the table, eating and talking about everything. And nothing. The weather, recipes, books they'd read recently. For the first time, their conversation felt natural, unguarded. When Mrs. Ramirez left an hour later, waving goodbye with a promise to return soon, Linda realized something important. She no longer felt like an outsider looking in. She was part of the fabric of Oak Street now, woven into its story alongside everyone else. Despite the progress, challenges still arose. Old habits die hard, and there were days when Linda caught herself slipping back into negativity. Once, during a particularly icy week, she muttered under her breath about how messy the sidewalks were. Catching herself mid-complaint, she stopped and sighed. "Sorry," she said aloud to no one. That wasn't helpful. Later that evening, she called Emily Carter to apologize, explaining how she had almost fallen back into old patterns. To her surprise, Emily laughed warmly. "We all slip up sometimes," she said. "What matters is that you noticed and cared enough to say something. That's growth, Linda." Her words stayed with Linda long after they hung up. Growth. It was such a simple concept, yet so powerful. Change wasn't about perfection. It was about effort, about choosing to move forward even when the road was bumpy. By February, spring was beginning to peek through the lingering chill. Crocuses pushed their way through patches of melting snow, and birds returned to the trees, filling the air with song. On Oak Street, life continued to bloom in its own way. Neighbors worked together to clear storm debris, planted new flowers in the community garden, and planned a spring fair to celebrate the season. Linda stood in the garden one afternoon, digging holes for seedlings alongside Mr. Patel. He handed her a packet of marigold seeds, explaining how they repelled pests. "Naturally. These will protect the vegetables," he said with a grin. "And they're pretty too." Linda smiled back, feeling a sense of pride in what they had built together. The garden wasn't just a collection of plants. It was a symbol of resilience, proof that even damaged soil could yield beautiful things if given care and patience. As she pressed the seeds into the earth, Linda reflected on her journey. She had come so far, from being a woman consumed by bitterness to someone who actively sought connection and understanding. There were still moments of doubt, of course, and she knew she would always have more to learn. But for the first time in her life, she felt hopeful, not just for herself, but for the community she now called home. Spring was here, and with it came renewal. And on Oak Street, that renewal extended beyond the seasons, reaching deep into the hearts of its residents, including Linda Harper. Spring had fully taken hold on Oak Street, and the neighborhood buzzed with new life. The trees were lush with green leaves, flowers bloomed in every yard, and the air smelled fresh after morning rain showers. It was a time of renewal, not just for nature, but for the people who called this place home. For Linda Harper, it marked another step forward in her journey to become someone better. The community garden was thriving, its rows of vegetables and herbs growing taller each day. Linda visited often, tending to the plants she had helped plant months earlier. She found comfort in the routine of watering, weeding, and checking for pests. It was peaceful work, and it gave her time to think about how far she had come since her arrival on Oak Street. Sometimes, as she knelt in the dirt, she would glance up and see her neighbors laughing or chatting nearby. They weren't perfect moments. There were still awkward silences and lingering doubts, but they were real, and that made them precious. One Saturday morning, George Miller announced plans for a spring fair to celebrate the season. "It'll Be fun, he said at a neighborhood meeting. We can have games, food stalls, and maybe even a little concert. Everyone's invited to help out. Linda immediately volunteered to assist with organizing the event. She worked closely with Emily Carter, Mrs. Patel, and Daniel Brooks to plan activities and decorations. Together, they decided to host a bake sale, a flower arranging contest, and a scavenger hunt for the kids. Linda also suggested setting up a booth where visitors could write notes of gratitude and hang them on a thank you tree. The idea was inspired by something she had read online, a way to encourage positivity and connection. On the day of the fair, Oak Street transformed into a vibrant festival ground. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze and tables lined the sidewalks, displaying homemade pies, jars of jam, and hand-painted pottery. Children ran around with balloons tied to their wrists, while adults mingled and laughed over cups of lemonade. The atmosphere was lively yet warm, filled with the kind of joy that comes from shared effort and goodwill. Linda stood near the thank you tree, watching as people added their notes. Some messages were simple. Thank you for being my neighbor, or I'm grateful for this community. Others were more personal, like the one Mrs. Ramirez pinned up. Thank you for giving me a second chance. When Linda saw it, her throat tightened and she blinked back tears. She hadn't expected such kindness, not after everything she had done. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to set, George gathered everyone near the main stage for a brief speech. This neighborhood has been through a lot, he said, his voice steady and sincere. But we've shown that we're stronger together. We've learned to forgive, to grow, and to support one another. So let's keep building on that. Let's make Oak Street a place where everyone feels welcome. His words earned applause, and when he stepped down, several neighbors approached Linda to congratulate her on the success of the fair. Even Daniel Brooks gave her a nod of approval. You did good, he said simply before walking off to join his wife. As the weeks passed, Linda continued to find ways to contribute to the community. She joined a book club hosted by Emily Carter, where members discussed novels that explored themes of empathy and understanding. At first, she hesitated to share her thoughts, worried she might say something wrong. But the group encouraged her, reminding her that growth takes time. Slowly, she began to open up, sharing insights and listening intently to others' perspectives. One evening, during a discussion about a novel set in a small town divided by prejudice, Linda spoke up unexpectedly. I used to think I was protecting myself by pushing people away, she admitted. But really, I was just hurting myself and everyone else. I'm learning now that differences aren't bad. They're what make us interesting. Her honesty stunned the group into silence for a moment. Then Emily smiled warmly. That's beautiful, Linda. Thank you for sharing that. By late spring, the neighborhood felt different, not just because of the warmer weather, but because of the relationships that had deepened over time. Neighbors waved hello more often, stopped to chat longer, and looked out for one another in small but meaningful ways. Linda noticed these changes and felt proud to be part of them. She no longer dreaded stepping outside. Instead, she looked forward to seeing familiar faces and hearing snippets of conversation as she walked down the street. One evening, as she sat on her porch reading, Mr. Patel stopped by with a basket of freshly picked mint leaves. For tea, he explained with a smile. Thought you might enjoy them. Thank you, Linda said, touched by the gesture. That's very kind of you. Mr. Patel lingered for a moment, leaning against the railing. You know, Linda, I used to worry about having you as a neighbor. But now, I'm glad you're here. You've changed, for the better. His words brought tears to her eyes. I'm trying, she whispered. Every day I'm trying. And we see that, Mr. Patel replied gently. That's what matters. Summer arrived, bringing long days and warm nights. The community garden flourished under the care of its volunteers, producing enough vegetables to share with everyone. Linda spent many evenings there, sitting on a bench and watching fireflies dance among the plants. It was during one of these quiet moments that Emily Carter joined her, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. Mind if I sit? Emily asked, gesturing to the space beside Linda. Of course not, Linda replied, scooting over to make room. They sipped their drinks in companionable silence, listening to the chirping of crickets. After a while, Emily spoke. "Do you ever wonder why things turned out the way they did?" Linda thought about the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I think about how angry I was when I moved here and how lonely I felt. Maybe if I hadn't pushed everyone away so hard, things would have been different sooner." Emily nodded. "Maybe, but maybe not. Sometimes we need to hit rock bottom before we can climb back up." "That's true," Linda agreed. "And I guess I needed all of you to show me the way." "Well, we're glad you stuck around," Emily said with a grin, "even if you gave us a run for our money at first." They both laughed, the sound light and easy. In that moment, Linda realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't just about letting go of the past. It was also about embracing the present, the friendships, the laughter, the sense of belonging she had once feared she'd never find. As summer faded into fall, life on Oak Street settled into a comfortable rhythm. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had healed enough to allow for happiness. Linda knew she would always carry reminders of her mistakes, but she also knew she wasn't defined by them. She was defined by what she chose to do next. And so far, those choices had led her to a place of peace. On a crisp October evening, the neighborhood gathered once again for a harvest celebration. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted vegetables, apple pies, and spiced cider. Children chased each other through piles of leaves, their giggles echoing through the cool air. As Linda looked around at the smiling faces, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She caught George Miller's eye across the crowd and raised her glass in a silent toast. He nodded, returning the gesture with a knowing smile. In that moment, Linda understood that redemption wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And though the road ahead might still hold challenges, she was ready to face them, with her neighbors by her side. Oak Street had taught her that change was possible, that kindness could overcome cruelty, and that forgiveness was a gift worth giving. Most importantly, it had shown her that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always hope for a brighter tomorrow.